videos I'm doing on the folklore and symbology of British plants and trees. And today we have the apple tree, symbol of good health and also abundance, absolute limitless abundance, the power and joy of giving and also receiving. Love and sometimes also immortality, fertility and the underworld, but mainly abundance, just absolute generosity. And we can see this quite clearly all around me, at my feet and on the ground. There are apples littering the floor everywhere. The meaning of abundance to our ancestors must have been clear, because this would have been a really important food group. One of the most abundant fruits in these islands. These trees here are crab apple trees, which is the wild variety of apple as opposed to the cultivated apple, which I will show you later when I walk down to the orchard. But this wild variety, it's been on these islands for thousands of years, but probably originated in Central Asia, and it's actually made its way here with humans, migrating humans and their grazing animals. So it has a connection, even this wild variety, with humanity. So it's quite a friendly tree, even the wild one. A druid once told me that the orchard apple trees are a lot friendlier in spirit than this wild variety, but never trust a druid. But really symbolizes the idea of giving and receiving and abundance. There's a lot in you hear a lot these days in sort of new age circles about the idea of manifesting and the law of attraction, and like attracting like. So it sort of ties in with that. And if you like that idea, then why don't you give this video a like and attract lots of good things into your life. See what I did there? It's a very useful, very useful fruit, the apple. This one, the crab apple, it's not particularly edible. I mean, it kind of, just really bitter, but it is edible when you cook it. So it probably was a very vital food source for our ancestors. It's also got a lot of pectin in it, so it's good for making like jams and preserves even today, and probably had a role in preserving food, so very important. Also particularly important, it's used for making this. This here is apple cider. If any of you are watching in the US, here in Britain, cider is an alcoholic fermented beverage. This here is made from a mixture of sweet and cooking apples from our orchard down on the farm, but also crab apples from these trees. And it's useful because if you haven't got very good cider apples, which we don't down there, just a few, it provides a lot of tannins and also tart taste. So this here is nice alcoholic cider. Oh, you see that fizz there? That is lovely. Can you see that? So it's always important in cider making parts of the country that this is. I'm in the West Country here. Very good climate for making cider. Quite warm and moist. It's always important to give a little drink to the trees that have given so generously with their fruit. So again, tying into this idea, even in the folklore and old ways, just the idea of gratitude and giving back. So we all need a little bit more of that in our lives, I think. So if you need a little bit more of that abundance, then spend some time with this tree. Thank you. That really is delicious. So, here we are in the orchard Old apple tree, I wassail thee, hats full, caps full, 3 bushel bags full, and a little pile under the stairs. Wassail, wassail, wassail. Hello everyone, welcome. So I've got here an Ogham stick, or Ogham stick, which is the Celtic or Druidic, so-called Druidic tree alphabet, where every tree has a letter. This is Q, or Quert, meaning apple. And it also has a symbolic meaning as well. So as I said earlier, this means abundance, generosity, giving, limitless giving, also love, divination, and access to the other world. It's also very associated with magic, lots of folkloric and sympathetical magical applications of this particular plant. It's got a very old relationship with humans and as a magical plant. So some magical uses of the apple include divination, say counting the number of pips that might be inside it for a yes or no answer. Also in lots of acts of love magic, always has been, you could, I say, throw an apple with a certain polish and with a charm on it, throw it, and if your lover catches it, then that's an obligation. You can throw the pips in a fire and say names of potential lovers, and if they pop and sizzle, then they're fiery with love for you. Things like that. This sort of folk magic applications. The apple is also associated with sympathetic magic in a very old English tradition, which I've already insinuated, that of wassailing. Wassail means good health, and this is a very old pre-Christian practice, and there's a bit of folklore attached to it, right? The piece of folklore is this. Once, long ago, on Christmas Eve, there was a poor farmer who had made his batch of mulled cider. This is hot, spicy cider. And he had just got down to his last cup, and he had given a lot away, and he had 1 cup left, and he really wanted to drink it, but instead he went down and placed it at the roots of the oldest apple tree in the orchard, which is this one here. Now, when he came back on Christmas Day, there was a little wizened, hunched man with sort of ivy in his beard and a little, little wrinkly eyes and a little glint in his eyes and a hook nose and long, clever brown fingers. And he said, "Thank you very much for your generosity. I really enjoyed that mulled cider, that wassail you gave me yesterday. I'm going to make it up to you. I'm going to tell you, underneath the roots of this tree in your very orchard is a pot of gold." And the man dug, and sure enough, there was a pot of gold there, and the farmer was rich beyond his wildest dreams, and he was very generous with that wealth. And indeed, the next year, the apple trees were very generous with their harvest of apples. So it was a cycle of generosity. So again, tying into the idea of generosity and giving associated with the apple, which is very fitting as we come up to Christmas. Also, there's obviously encoded in this a very old piece of sympathetic magic, right? So you give some of the cider to the tree, and it in turn bestows you more apples for next year, and that cycle continues. So this tradition is done in wassailing in the West Country in Britain, and in lots of parts of Britain, where on 12th night, which is usually about the 5th of January, I'll take you there this year if you want, the people of the village will make some mulled cider from last year's brew, and it will be mixed with herbs and spices. Maybe had a little charm read over it, like the 9 herbs charm from Anglo-Saxon magic, something like that. And they'll take it around and they'll pour it on the roots of every apple tree in the orchard, and then they'll make a hell of a noise with pots and pans. And they'll take a piece of toast with some of the wassail, some of the cider smeared on it, and they'll put it up in the tallest branches of the tree for all the birds as a gift. And they'll sing the wassail song, which I sang for you earlier, and they'll get their shotguns and they'll shoot into the branches, yes, really, and make a hell of a noise. The idea of this is to scare off all the evil spirits so that next year the apple tree will blossom. So that is the tradition of wassailing, and it's connected with sympathetic Old English magic. In the Celtic tradition as well, the apple has a lot of associations with the other world. So the island of Avalon the mythic Isle of Avalon, which is sometimes said to be in Somerset, that is a gateway to the other world. So it's where King Arthur sort of disappeared into the other world. It's sometimes a gateway of fairy, sometimes a gift of an apple gives entrance to the other world. So all of these sorts of associations with the other world, and of course Samhain, Halloween that we've just had. The apple is very, very ubiquitous in various old Celtic festivals like that, apple bobbing. Some people say, I'm not sure how much truth there is in this, but some people say that the custom of apple bobbing is connected to a druidic custom of making captured prisoners bob for apples in scalding hot liquid before they're put in the sort of wicker men and set on fire. Obviously, there might be a hint of sort of Roman propaganda to that, or it might just be fancy. So yeah, there you have it, the apple. I'm now going to talk about some of the folklore associated, wider folklore associated with this guy.
Wassail, wassail all over the town. Our bread it is white and our ale it is brown. Our bowl it is made of the green maple tree.
So, apples in folklore and mythology. It's mainly a positive thing, but sometimes a negative. It's a bit of an ambivalent tree, the apple. So in Greek mythology, we've got the apple of discord, of course. That pretty much kicks off the Trojan War. In sort of European fairy tale, it features a lot, sometimes negatively. Think of the poisoned apple of Snow White. Also, of course, most famously, the tree of knowledge is in popular culture usually understood to be an apple tree since the Middle Ages, if not before. It probably wasn't originally in the Near Eastern myth because, you know, apples don't really grow in that part of the world. It's probably a fig or something like that, maybe a date. But apple in Old English, the Old English word apple just means fruit, and that can be any fruit. So we all know the Garden of Eden story, you know, the apple is an apple of temptation and it causes the fall of man. But there's another version of this as well in the Gnostic school of thought, which is arguably truer, in my opinion. So, you know, the garden and all of this whole garden we're in is a prison in the Gnostic idea, and the fruit that the serpent gives to Eve and Adam is the spirit of gnosis, the spirit of divine inspiration and knowledge, if you like. And the apple is the apple of knowledge that the evil god, the evil demiurge, wants to keep hidden from us. So a complete inversion of the traditional Garden of Eden story. And that's interesting because it does tie in with Celtic and British folklore as well. Because there is a tree of knowledge in Celtic folklore. It's usually a hazel tree, so these hazelnuts drop from it into a pool, and the salmon of wisdom gobbles up the hazelnuts, and then Finn McCool eats the salmon, or he gets 3 drops on his thumb and puts his thumb in his mouth and sees everything. A very similar story is also the story of Taliesin and the cauldron of Ceridwen, which I told recently on this channel. I'll put it there. But because apple means any fruit, the hazel tree could have, the original tree of knowledge in Celtic folklore could have been crabapple tree. Other places where the apple appears, the apple tree appears in European folklore is, of course, the Norse goddess Idun, who has the golden apples, and these are the apples of immortality, tying into immortality again. It keeps the gods young. And Idun's a kind of fertility goddess. She's one of the Vanir, so not one of the Aesir, a different class of god, fertility goddess. But in this story, which I will tell here, actually, I'll put it up here once I've made it, or subscribe if you want, and then I'll let you know. But it keeps the gods young, keeps them young. And in the story, Loki tricks Idun out of losing her apples, and they start getting a bit old and senile. It's quite a humorous myth. But yeah, so they're a story of apples associated with youth and fertility and immortality. Other places we see apples appear in folklore and fairy tale. Well, a lot of places actually. They're quite often at the beginning of European fairy tales. They often kick off events. There's usually a monarch, usually a king, that's very possessive about his apple tree. In the story, the gnome, the earth gnome, it's one of Brothers Grimm's tales, but you know, much older than that. there's a king who's got an apple tree and is very covetous about these apples, and he likes to count them and doesn't let anyone go near the apples, even though when he was younger, when his wife was still alive, he used to freely give them out. And since he's become very covetous of the apples, the land itself has become unfertile. It's begin to suffer. So again, that ties into this idea I spoke about earlier of abundance. So if you hold on to things, then stuff won't come to you. You know, those channels are blocked. Whereas if you're very, very giving, then stuff will flow to you. It's, again, that in New Age concepts, the law of attraction. So that's encoded in a lot of these fairy tales, that very concept, and it's in this tree here.
Wassail, wassail,